In 1915, every airplane on Earth was made of wood, wire, and stretched fabric, canvas over wooden frames held together with steel cables tensioned by hand. The machines looked like kites that had been given engines and dared to carry men. They were fragile. They warped in rain. They rotted in storage. They caught fire on impact. A hard landing could crack a spar. A storm could peel the fabric off a wing in flight. Pilots trusted their lives to structures that a carpenter would have recognized and a shipwright would have rejected. This was not a temporary limitation. This was the entire state of the art. Every aircraft designer in every country on Earth accepted it. Wood was light. Wood was available. Wood was what airplanes were made of. The question was never whether to build with wood. The question was which species of wood to use. One man looked at this consensus and saw it for what it was. Not a law of physics, but a habit. His name was Hugo Junkers. He was 56 years old. He had never designed an airplane. He had spent his career building gas engines, water heaters, and calorimeters. And on December 12, 1915, at an airfield outside Dessau, he flew the first all-metal airplane in history. The machine that made every airplane after it possible was built by a man the aviation industry had never heard of. Hugo Junkers was born on February 3, 1859, in Reit, a town in the Prussian Rhine province near Mönchengladbach. His father, Johann Heinrich Junkers, owned a cotton weaving mill. The family was wealthy. Hugo and his 6 siblings received educations that most German children could not dream of. He completed his secondary schooling in 1878, attended the Royal Polytechnic University in Charlottenburg, then transferred to the Royal Technical University in Aachen, graduating in 1883 with a degree in mechanical engineering. He did not go into aviation. Aviation barely existed. The Wright brothers would not fly at Kitty Hawk for another 20 years. Junkers went into thermodynamics. He returned to work in his father's company, then attended advanced lectures on electromagnetism and thermodynamics in Charlottenburg under the physicist Adolf Slaby. Slaby placed him with the Continental Gas Company in Dessau, where Junkers worked on the development of opposed piston gas engines. The work required precision. To optimize a gas engine, you needed to know the exact energy content of the fuel you were burning. No reliable method existed to measure it. Junkers built one. In 1892, he patented a calorimeter, a device that measured temperature differences in precisely controlled volumes of water as they absorbed heat from burning gas samples. The instrument eliminated the guesswork that had plagued gas engine development for years. In 1893, Junkers personally presented the calorimeter at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. It was awarded a gold medal. Most inventors would have stopped there. Junkers kept thinking. He had created a system that efficiently transferred heat from a burning gas flame to flowing water. The measurement was specific to the calorimeter. The heat transfer mechanism was universal. He saw a commercial product inside a scientific instrument. In 1894, he patented a gas-fired bath boiler, not a storage tank that heated water slowly and lost energy while it sat. A tankless heater. Water flowed through tubes positioned directly in the flame path. The burner ignited when someone opened a tap. It shut off when the tap closed. Instant hot water. No waste. No waiting. In 1895, Junkers founded Junkers & Company in Dessau to manufacture the heater. He had one investor, Robert Ludwig, who provided startup capital. The business succeeded immediately. Junkers repaid Ludwig's entire investment within 2 years. The tankless water heater became one of the most successful consumer products in German industrial history. Within a decade, Junkers heaters were installed in apartment buildings, hospitals, and hotels across Germany and beyond. The brand name Junkers on a water heater meant the same thing. It would later mean on an airplane. Reliability built by an engineer who understood heat transfer at a level his competitors could not match. In 1897, he accepted a professorship in mechanical engineering at the Technische Hochschule in Aachen, where he lectured for the next 15 years while simultaneously running the company in Dessau. He patented gas stoves, pressure regulators, fan heaters, and oil engines. He founded a private research institute, the Versuchsanstalt Professor Junkers, funded entirely from his company's profits. He established additional companies in the mechanical engineering sector. He filed dozens of patents. By the time he turned 50, Hugo Junkers was a wealthy industrialist, a respected professor, and one of the most prolific patent holders in German mechanical engineering. He had not touched an airplane. In 1908, everything changed. Hans Reisner, a German aviation pioneer and engineer at Aachen, had been developing an all-metal aircraft. He needed corrugated iron wings manufactured to a precision that no ordinary metal shop could achieve. Junkers and Company in Dessau could. Junkers built the wings. The collaboration pulled him into aerodynamics for the first time. He was 49 years old. Junkers did not dabble. He constructed a wind tunnel. He studied airfoils. In 1910, he patented a cantilever wing design with a thick profile and no external bracing. No wires, no struts. The wing's own internal structure carried all the loads. Every other airplane in the world used external bracing to hold the wings in place. Junkers proposed eliminating it entirely. The patent was radical. It described the structural philosophy that would define commercial aviation for the next century. Then the war intervened. In 1914, the German government conscripted Junkers and his factory for military production. He was ordered to build aircraft. He did not want to build weapons. He was a pacifist, a man with socialist sympathies who believed technology existed to connect people, not to destroy them. The government did not care what he believed. It cared what he could build. Junkers built. On December 12, 1915, the Junkers J-1 lifted off from an airfield near Dessau. It was a monoplane constructed entirely from sheet iron, later replaced with sheet steel. No wood, no fabric, no external bracing. The test pilots nicknamed it the Blechesel, the sheet metal donkey. It was heavy, weighing significantly more than comparable wooden aircraft. It was slower than the biplanes the military favored, but it flew, and when it landed hard, it did not splinter. When it sat in the rain, it did not warp. When a bullet struck it, it did not catch fire like canvas. The military establishment was unimpressed. The generals wanted fast, agile biplanes made of wood and canvas. The J-1 was a slow, heavy monoplane made of metal. It looked wrong. It sounded wrong. It violated every assumption the aviation world held sacred. Junkers did not care about assumptions. He cared about physics. Wood warped, metal did not. Wood rotted, metal did not. Wood burned on impact, metal survived. The J-1 was not an operational fighter. It was a proof of concept, a technology demonstrator built as a private venture. The concept was that the future of aviation was metal. Every designer who dismissed it was defending a material that was already obsolete. They simply did not know it yet. By 1917, Junkers had refined the design into the J-I, a two-seat armored ground attack aircraft with a metal fuselage that formed a protective bathtub around the engine, pilot, and observer. The armor shielded the crew from small arms fire during low-level missions over the trenches. The German military ordered 227 of them. It was the first all-metal aircraft to enter mass production anywhere in the world. The government forced Junkers into a partnership with the Dutch manufacturer Anthony Fokker. The partnership was hostile. Fokker wanted access to Junkers' metal construction techniques. Junkers wanted to be left alone. The collaboration dissolved after the war, but not before producing the DI, the world's first low-winged single-seat fighter aircraft, and the first airplane built entirely from duralumin, the aluminum alloy that would become the standard material of aviation for the next 80 years. The war ended on November 11, 1918. Germany was defeated. The Treaty of Versailles imposed brutal restrictions on German aviation. Military aircraft production was forbidden. The Allies destroyed thousands of German warplanes. The entire military aviation infrastructure was dismantled. Hugo Junkers saw this not as a disaster, but as a liberation. He had never wanted to build weapons. Now the treaty compelled him to build what he had always wanted to build: civilian aircraft. Machines designed not to kill, but to carry people from one place to another in safety and comfort. In early 1919, Junkers instructed his chief designer Otto Reuter to develop an aircraft purely for civilian use. 6 months later, on June 25, 1919, test pilot Emil Mons lifted the Junkers F-13 off the runway at Dessau. It was the world's first all-metal passenger aircraft. Every other airplane of the era was built from wood and covered with linen. The F-13 was constructed entirely from corrugated duralumin. a low-wing cantilever monoplane with no external bracing. It featured an enclosed heated passenger cabin that seated 4 people in comfort behind large windows. The pilot sat in an open cockpit because aviators in 1919 still believed they flew best when exposed to the elements. The passengers, however, rode inside a sealed cabin like civilized travelers. Junkers named the first prototype Herta after his oldest daughter. On September 13, 1919, Emil Mons flew the F-13 to a world altitude record of 20,146 feet with 7 passengers aboard. The performance silenced the skeptics. Between 1919 and 1932, Junkers built 322 F-13s. The aircraft flew with airlines on every inhabited continent. Deutsche Lufthansa, the precursor to Lufthansa, operated them across Europe. Lloyd Aéreo Boliviano flew them over the Andes. Skadta flew them in Colombia. Varig flew them in Brazil. Airlines in China, South Africa, and the Soviet Union bought them. The last commercial F-13 was not retired until 1951 in Brazil. An aircraft designed in 1919 was still flying, paying passengers 32 years later. The F-13 did not merely advance commercial aviation, it created it. Before the F-13, commercial air travel was an experiment conducted in converted military biplanes with open cockpits and no protection from the weather. Passengers sat in the slipstream, goggles on, scarves wrapped around their faces, praying the engine held and the fabric wings did not tear. After the F-13, air travel was something a businessman could do in a suit without ruining it. The heated enclosed cabin was not a luxury. It was the invention that made aviation a civilian industry rather than a military curiosity adapted for paying customers. Ford Motor Company studied the F-13's corrugated metal construction and used the same principles to build the Ford Trimotor. Andrei Tupolev in the Soviet Union studied Junkers' designs and built his own all-metal aircraft using the same structural philosophy. The ideas that Hugo Junkers had patented and proven spread across the world's aviation industry within a decade. The principles became invisible. They became assumptions. They became the way airplanes were built. Junkers did not stop at building airplanes. He built the airlines that flew them. In the early 1920s, he founded Junkers Luftverkehr, an airline that operated routes across Germany and into neighboring countries using his own aircraft. By 1926, Junkers Luftverkehr was one of the 2 largest airlines in Germany. That year, it merged with Deutsche Aero Lloyd to form Deutsche Lufthansa AG, the airline that would become Lufthansa. Junkers aircraft formed the backbone of the new national carrier. The ambition was not merely commercial. Junkers believed aviation could unify the world. He envisioned a global network of air routes connecting nations and cultures, making war economically irrational. He established a manufacturing plant in Fili, a suburb of Moscow, producing aircraft for the Soviet Union under a secret arrangement that allowed Germany to develop aviation technology outside the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles. He sold planes to South American airlines operating in some of the most demanding terrain on Earth: jungles, mountains, deserts. His metal airplanes survived conditions that would have destroyed fabric and wood machines within months. He was also one of the principal sponsors of the Bauhaus movement. When the avant-garde design school was expelled from Weimar by the conservative Thuringian government in 1925, Junkers facilitated its relocation to Dessau, bringing it to the city where his factory stood. He provided financial support and political backing for the move. The industrialist who built all-metal airplanes supported the architects and designers who were reinventing the built world. The connection was not accidental. Junkers saw no boundary between engineering and culture. Both were expressions of the same impulse, to build something better than what existed. But the ambition exceeded the cash flow. The Soviet venture drained resources. The airline operations were expensive. The development of new aircraft models consumed capital faster than sales replenished it. In 1926, unable to meet government loan repayments, Junkers lost control of most of his businesses. Junkers Luftverkehr was merged into the new Deutsche Lufthansa against his wishes. The Great Depression arrived in 1929 and devastated the aviation market. By 1932, Junkers was fighting bankruptcy. He sold virtually all of his personal assets to keep the aircraft and engine companies alive. The man who had been one of Germany's wealthiest industrialists was now leveraged to the limit, holding on to his companies through sheer financial desperation. In the late 1920s, his team developed the G-38, a four-engined passenger aircraft that was the largest airliner in the world when it entered service with Lufthansa in 1931. Passengers could walk inside the leading edge of its enormous wings. It was a flying building. Then came the machine that would outlast everything else Junkers built. In 1930, engineer Ernst Zindel and his team at the Dessau Works began designing the Ju-52. The single-engine prototype first flew on October 13, 1930. In 1932, Zindel added two more engines, creating the Ju-52-3EM, a trimotor transport that could carry 17 passengers or 3 tons of freight, cruise at 150 mph, and operate from small unpaved airfields in remote locations. The corrugated duralumin skin that Junkers had pioneered in 1915 gave the fuselage its distinctive ribbed surface and its structural strength. Deutsche Lufthansa eventually operated more than 200 Ju-52s. The aircraft flew routes in Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. It could fly from Berlin to Rome in 8 hours. Airlines and air forces around the world purchased it. Pilots called it Tante Ju, Aunt Junkers, or Iron Annie. It was reliable, durable, and forgiving of rough handling on primitive airfields. In total, 4,845 Ju-52s were manufactured. It was the world's first mass-produced airliner. By the early 1930s, Hugo Junkers had built the first all-metal airplane, the first all-metal passenger aircraft, one of the world's largest airlines, and the most widely produced airliner in history. He held patents on aircraft engines, heaters, and industrial equipment. He employed thousands of workers across multiple factories. He was 73 years old. He had 12 children with his wife Therese. His name was synonymous with German aviation. Then the Nazis came. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Within weeks, the new regime began consolidating control over German industry. Aviation was the priority. Hermann Göring, the former World War I fighter ace who had commanded the legendary Jagdgeschwader Marmars after Manfred von Richthofen's death, was named Reichskommissar of Aviation. Göring had a personal history with Junkers. In the early 1920s, he had allegedly applied for a job as a test pilot at the Junkers factory and been rejected. Whether or not the story was true, the resentment was documented by contemporaries. Göring had the power of the state behind him now. Junkers had nothing but the right to say no. Göring and the Nazi government had one demand. Junkers must retool his factories for military rearmament. Germany was secretly rebuilding the air force that the Treaty of Versailles had forbidden. The Nazis needed Junkers' factories, his engineers, his patents, and his production capacity to build the warplanes that would equip the new Luftwaffe. Hugo Junkers refused. He was a pacifist. He was a socialist. He had spent the past 15 years building civilian aircraft designed to carry passengers and connect nations. He had no intention of turning his life's work into a weapons factory for a regime he despised. He told the Nazis no. The Nazis did not accept no. They responded with the full apparatus of state power. The government demanded ownership of all of Junkers' patents and a controlling 51% stake in both Junkers Flugzeug und Motorenwerke AG and the Junkers Engine Company. The demand was accompanied by a threat. If Junkers did not comply, he would be charged with high treason. In 1933, under the Nazi regime, high treason carried a death sentence. Junkers resisted. He negotiated. He delayed. He tried to protect what he had built. It was futile. The regime accused him of espionage and financial mismanagement. Under relentless pressure and the explicit threat of imprisonment, Junkers was forced to surrender his majority stake in the companies. He signed over his patents, the businesses he had founded, the aircraft he had designed, and the factories he had built in Dessau. All of it passed into the hands of the Nazi state. Then they removed him from his own city. In 1934, the Nazi authorities legally excluded Hugo Junkers from Dessau, the city where he had lived and worked for 46 years, the city where he had founded Junkers and Company in 1895, where he had built the J-1 and the F-13, where he had employed thousands of people and constructed an industrial empire from a rented workshop. He was placed under house arrest, first in Bayerischzell in the Bavarian Alps, then in a villa in Gauting, a small town near Munich. He was forbidden from returning to his factories. He was forbidden from participating in his companies. He was forbidden from the work that had defined his entire adult life. The Nazis gave the public a different story. Officially, they announced that Professor Junkers had retired from active business to devote more time to personal research. The struggle between the regime and the man whose name was on every factory door was hidden behind the language of voluntary withdrawal. The appropriation was disguised as succession. Hugo Junkers spent the last months of his life under house arrest, separated from his work, his city, and his company. He was 75 years old. His health was failing. He suffered from a gallbladder disease that had worsened over the preceding months. He was still negotiating with the regime over the transfer of his remaining shares and interests when the end came. On February 1, 1935, Hugo Junkers moved into the villa at Germeringer Strasse 30 in Gauting. 2 days later, on February 3, 1935, he died. It was his 76th birthday. He died on the exact date he had been born, in a house he had occupied for only 2 days, in a town that had nothing to do with his life or his work, separated from everything he had built by the government that had stolen it. His wife Therese was left with the remaining shares. The Nazis forced her to sell them at a fraction of their market value. The last piece of Hugo Junkers' empire passed into the hands of the Third Reich. The seizure was complete. Then came the performance. Göring and Erhard Milch, the State Secretary of Aviation, ordered a state funeral. The regime that had stripped Junkers of his company, placed him under house arrest, banned him from his own city, and hounded him until his death now stood before his coffin and delivered mourning speeches. Göring attended. Senior officials attended. The Nazi government that had destroyed the man celebrated the legend. The name Junkers was too valuable to the regime's aviation ambitions to allow the truth to circulate. The state funeral was not an act of respect. It was an act of appropriation. The Nazis buried Hugo Junkers and took his name for themselves. Under Nazi control, the Junkers works at Dessau produced some of the most devastating military aircraft of the Second World War. The Ju-87 Stuka, designed by Hermann Pohlmann and first flown in 1935, featured inverted gull wings and wailing dive sirens attached to its landing gear. The sirens existed for no engineering reason. They existed to terrorize the people on the ground. The Stuka became the symbol of blitzkrieg. It terrorized Poland, France, and the Low Countries. The screaming dive bomber bore the Junkers name on every blueprint, every production order, every fuselage plate. Hugo Junkers had nothing to do with its design. He had been dead for 2 months before it first flew. He had been stripped of his company 2 years before it entered service. I would have been revolted by a machine designed to make human beings scream in terror. The Ju-88, a twin-engined medium bomber, became the most versatile combat aircraft in the Luftwaffe's inventory. It served as a bomber, a night fighter, a reconnaissance platform, and a torpedo bomber. Nearly 15,000 were built. The Junkers Jumo engines powered aircraft across the German military. The Jumo 004 became one of the world's first operational turbojet engines, fitted to the Messerschmitt Me 262. The first jet fighter to see combat. Every one of these machines carried the legacy of the all-metal construction that Hugo Junkers had pioneered in 1915. The corrugated duralumin skin, the cantilever wing, the structural philosophy that metal could bear loads that wood and fabric could not. The engineering was his. The application was everything he had spent his life opposing. The Ju-52, the aircraft his team designed as a civilian airliner, was conscripted into military service. The Luftwaffe accepted 2,804 of them. They carried paratroopers into Crete. They supplied Rommel's Africa Corps. They flew into Stalingrad during the desperate airlift that failed to save the Sixth Army. Tante Ju, the beloved passenger plane, became a military transport that dropped soldiers into battles where they died by the thousands. The airplane Hugo Junkers had built to connect the world was used to conquer it. The war ended on May 8, 1945. Allied bombing had devastated the Junkers factories in Dessau. The city fell within the Soviet occupation zone. The Soviets dismantled what remained of the Junkers manufacturing infrastructure and shipped it east. The factories that Hugo Junkers had built, that the Nazis had seized, and that the Allies had bombed were stripped to bare concrete and hauled to the Soviet Union as war reparations. The Junkers Company ceased to exist. Dessau itself was rebuilt under East German rule. The Junkers works were never restored. The tools were gone. The engineers had scattered. The institutional knowledge that Hugo Junkers had accumulated over 4 decades of metal aircraft development was dispersed across the occupying powers, absorbed into Soviet and Western aviation programs, and erased from the city that had produced it. After German reunification in 1990, Dessau began to reckon with the legacy of the man who had built its most important industry. A museum was established, streets were named, and a research institute was dedicated to his memory. But for decades, the name Junkers in public memory belonged not to the pacifist engineer who had built the world's first metal airplane and the world's first metal airliner. It belonged to the Stuka. It belonged to the bombers. It belonged to the war machines the Nazis had built in his factories after they had taken everything from him and watched him die. Hugo Junkers' son attempted to reclaim control of the company through the German courts after the war. He failed. The legal system that might have restored the family's stolen property did not deliver justice. Therese Junkers died in a car accident in 1950. The inheritance, such as it remained, passed to the 12 children. The historical record is clear on what Hugo Junkers built. The world's first practical all-metal aircraft in 1915. The world's first all-metal passenger airplane in 1919. The tankless gas water heater that heated homes across Europe and still operates under the Junkers brand today. The airline that became Lufthansa. The engineering philosophy that every commercial aircraft in the sky follows. Metal, not wood. Cantilever wings, not braced. Enclosed passenger cabins, not open cockpits. Monoplanes, not biplanes. Everything he proposed was rejected by the establishment of his era and adopted as the universal standard within a generation. The historical record is also clear on what was done to him. The Nazis demanded his company. He refused. They took it under threat of a treason charge that carried the death penalty. They removed him from the city where he had worked for 46 years. They placed him under house arrest. He died on his 76th birthday in a villa he had occupied for 2 days. His wife was forced to sell the remaining shares for a fraction of their value. The regime gave him a state funeral to claim his name for their war machine. Hugo Junkers did not build airplanes because he loved war. He built airplanes because he loved what airplanes could do when they were not carrying bombs. He believed flight would make borders irrelevant. He believed that a world connected by air routes would find war too expensive to wage. He built metal airplanes because metal lasted longer, flew safer, and carried more people more reliably than the fragile wooden machines that everyone else accepted as the only option. He was right about the metal. He was right about the future of aviation. He was wrong about what men would do with it. He was wrong about the world being too rational for war. He was wrong about the idea that connecting nations by air would make conquest obsolete. The same machines that carried passengers across continents carried paratroopers into battle. The same corrugated metal skin that protected travelers from the weather protected bombers from structural failure during dive attacks. The engineering was neutral. The men who controlled it were not. The machines he built changed the world. The world did not return the favor. The man who gave aviation its future died under house arrest, stripped of his work, erased from his own company, and buried with honors by the regime that destroyed him. The Nazis took the name. They took the factories. They took the patents. They could not take the engineering. The engineering outlived them all. Every commercial aircraft that flies today, every aluminum fuselage, every cantilever wing, every enclosed passenger cabin crosses the sky on principles that Hugo Junkers proved in a metal monoplane at an airfield outside Dessau in 1915. The man who built the sheet metal donkey built the future. He did it at 56 after a career spent building gas heaters and calorimeters because he looked at an industry built on wood and fabric and saw that it was waiting for someone to replace it with something that would last. The future forgot who paid for it. The name Junkers belongs to history now. It should belong to the man who earned it, not the regime that stole it. If this story changed how you look at the pioneers of the sky, please subscribe and like the channel. We are excavating the history they tried to bury. Let's build a better future together. The next treasure of history will be uncovered soon.